Welcome, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Interfaith Lecture Series. This is our third year doing this Interfaith Lecture Series. We began this 3 years ago looking at our Jewish brothers and sisters, and specifically through the lens of the experience of Holocaust, and what was that experience and what can we learn from it still today. And then last year we did the Tri-Faith kind of initiative and learned about our Muslim and Jewish and Christian brothers and sisters and how we interplay and engage together. And this year we really wanted to move towards some Eastern thought process and religion and begin to look at that. And we were originally talking about doing this whole thing on Eastern religions, and I said, wait, that's a lot. So how about we start with Buddhism? And that kind of launched us into engaging with Buddhism over the course of the next 3 Wednesdays. This week we have Busho Lan with us, who is going to be talking about Buddhism in general and what we can learn and understand about Buddhism and their understanding of Buddhism. And then next week again, Busho is going to be back with us. Our original lecturer for tonight couldn't be here, so Busho Lan stepped in, which is super grateful for that. Thank you. And then our third week, Suzanne Stabil is going to be with us. She's a Buddhist practitioner as well as a Catholic practitioner, and is going to be talking about her experience of how Buddhism has informed her Christian practice as well. So we would love for you to join us for all 3 of these. They're open to the public. If you have any friends who you would like to hear about this, please let them know. I do have these slides being sent around. We're printing more of them, and so those will come around. There's pens in the seat. Feel free to take notes, but I'll pass more around after we get started. But before we do, I want to introduce Busho Lan to us. He's a certified spiritual director and an ordained Soto Zen Buddhist priest. And he's also one of the senior teachers at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. He's grounded in contemplative spirituality, interfaith experience, addiction recovery, and shadow integration. And he's experienced in pilgrimage and retreat facilitation. He does a ton of public speaking on a variety of spiritual subjects. And his interests include ritual and ceremony, poetry, and interfaith dialogue. And he's been connected to the Aslan Institute as well as the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center for quite some time, and is one of their desired lecturers. I actually got connected to Busho Lan through St. Thomas and some engagement you did with them, and that's how I got connected to you and the work that you did.
Is that the connection?
Yeah. So,
very cool.
So really, and then from there also with Augsburg. So lecture you did both those places. So he lectures all around the area and is a greatly respected lecturer. Yeah. He also teaches meditation and mindfulness and the basics of Zen practice and philosophy. And he lives in Eden Prairie with his wonderful wife, Karen, which I can't leave that part out, right?
No, wonderful is the key word there.
So let's welcome Busho Lan to us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rustin. Thank you, John. Thank you, community of kind, wonderful people. This is my first time visiting this place, and it's fantastic. You know that already. But this is just an amazing location, and your facilities are, wow. Zen Center is about the size of one of your storage rooms. So just right away to give you a sense of. So can everybody, before I launch anything, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. If you, a little more up? Okay.
Where is the Zen Center?
Zen Center is on the east shore of what was Lake Calhoun and is now Lake Bede-Makaska. I'm getting pretty good at that, Bede-Makaska. No, that's St. Mary's, Greek Orthodox, and we're right next to them. We're very good friends with St. Mary's. There on the lake, and the Minnesota Zen Center has been in a big white house. We're just in a house. Zen centers can almost never afford to build a structure. So we meet in people's basements and old churches and houses and that kind of stuff. And our Zen Center has been in the house it's currently in for 45 years now. 45 years, which I know in terms of the average American institution, government institution, school, faith institution, 45 years, not particularly impressive. But in terms of a Buddhist temple in North America, that's really old. We're one of the oldest Buddhist temples in the country. Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. Isn't that weird, you guys? Wow. Okay. Is the volume better? Okay. If you can't hear me and you want to, just raise your hand or, and I'll just go, yeah, I am number one, and I appreciate your support. So my name is Busho Lan, and I'm from the Twin Cities. I've lived here my whole life. I'm going to say just a couple words about myself because I want you to know just a tiny bit about the lens through which I see this tradition, and therefore the lens through which we are all seeing it this evening. Does that make sense? I realize I've been asked to do something that I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to do, but is patently and ridiculously unfair, which is speak on behalf of millions and millions of people all over the world who would probably have a wildly different lived experience, perception of this broad and complex faith tradition, right? So I want you to know a little bit about the bias, does that make sense, of the person standing before you. So I'm a white guy from Bloomington. Okay, I'm going to start with that. Some people who have never met me, they see my name, and he's a Zen priest, and so then I show up and they're like, oh. And they're polite, White guy from Bloomington. I was raised Catholic, and so I went through baptism, First Communion, confirmation, like a lot of us raised in the Christian tradition in this country did. I discovered Zen practice. I discovered Buddhism without looking for it. In fact, I would say I was actively looking for anything other than religion. In my early 20s, I was about 23 when I discovered Buddhism, and I discovered it quite by accident. And my exposure to it at the very beginning is perhaps like yours. If you've been exposed to any kind of Buddhist thought, it was through reading a book. This is before the internet, so I wouldn't have been able to Wikipedia Buddhism, or Thich Nhat Hanh, or Pema Chodron, or one of those deals, right? But my first exposure to it was reading a book on Zen, which is a particular school of Buddhism, and I had never read anything like it. I had no idea that religion could show up looking or sounding that way. It was so different, wildly different than what I was raised with, that it kind of set my head on fire. I mean, it really started just like an intellectual fascination with the idea that Eastern religion was so much more different than I even imagined it being. So I was exposed to none of this stuff in school. I was exposed to none of this stuff in my catechism, CCD we used to call it. None of it. We didn't do any of this interfaith stuff. What you guys are doing here is fantastic. What you guys are doing here is fantastic. The potential for making human connections between heart and the healing that comes with it. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you guys know that. But it is so, so important. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. I work with St. Thomas. I work with Augsburg. I'm an interfaith fellow there. I'm seeing more and more and more Christian communities going, it is time to learn and reach out, right? Which is exactly what I accidentally did when I was in my early 20s. So I read a book that sort of started my head on fire. It was so fascinating. The religion was so different than what I would have thought. So I went to the library. Remember libraries? Books had pages at one point, anyway. And I just grabbed the first book I happened to find on Zen, just randomly, and I read it. And that book did for my heart what the first one did for my head. It started a fire. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I sure got into it. It just started a fire in my heart. I don't know how else to explain. I know all of us have had that experience where something just starts and you go, I'm moved on a level. I'm just moved on a very deep level that transcends my normal day-to-day sort of. Do you understand what I mean? More than just, oh, that's interesting or that's cool. It's like when you kind of go, oh, I'm cracking open and something's getting bigger in me. And I better follow this. And I have no idea what I'm looking for. So I drove to Minneapolis from Bloomington. Can you imagine? Almost a half an hour, folks. This is like a pilgrimage. And I went to the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center on the shore of what was then Lake Calhoun because I had to buy the official black meditation cushion that Zen people use. It has to be like a fundamentalist I was, like, oh, it's got to be the official one. And no internet, so they're the only people that sell them. And so I walked in this place, which turned out was a house. I was so disappointed. I really wanted it to be the gold dome. I had the address and was like, well, I'm driving, down the parkway and I'm looking for a Buddhist temple, so I'm certainly going to recognize it. It's going to stand out, I don't know what that looks like, but when you get to it, you're going to recognize it. Nope. I passed it 3 different times before I went, oh, shoot, okay. So I walked in there and went downstairs, and I bought a cushion from a man who was dressed very strangely. I was like, wow, pajamas all day, that's pretty sweet. I said, hi, I'm the one who called, and he said, oh yeah, take a cushion there, and I gave him whatever the money was or whatever, and he said, thank you so much. And he put his hands together like this and bowed to me. And I'm a white guy from Bloomington, raised Catholic. I've never been met this way, ever. I mean, it doesn't come up for us very often, does it? And I didn't know what to do with that. But some part of me, and I would argue just a human part, understood something very important is being expressed, by the placing of palms together and by the bowing of the head. Something was, does that make sense? It's something, even if we know nothing about that, we kind of get a feeling in our heart when somebody offers this to us. So I've been trying to solve the riddle, the puzzle, the koan, we would say, of that bow for about 30 years. I'm still working on it, folks. So that's the person who's standing in front of you. I have not trained formally in Tibet. I have not trained in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. I have not trained in Japan. These are nations that have a predominantly Buddhist population, right? All of my formal training has been in one school, Soto, of one tradition, Zen, that exists under one big giant umbrella called Buddhism, right? So my position this evening, as thrilled as I am to be in it, is a little bit like if any one of us was asked to go overseas and say, can you just speak on behalf of all Christianity for 45 minutes? Knowing in your heart that if a Baptist were to give that presentation, and then a Catholic were to give that presentation, and then a Greek Orthodox were to give that presentation, and then you'd have, right? So in a perfect world, Rustin would have a Tibetan Buddhist on Monday, and a Zen Buddhist on Tuesday, and a Theravadan Buddhist on Wednesday, and they would all say wildly different things, and you'd all be appropriately confused. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about just the 101. Buddhism 101, just the top level. Just the top level. And then next week, I'm going to talk specifically about Zen, and more specifically how that shows up in Minnesota. Right? Minnesota. That's what we're going to talk about next week. But today I'm going to try to keep it up here at the very, very highest level. And so I have a PowerPoint presentation. I will tell you, this is the second time in my life I have done a PowerPoint presentation. And my sister talked to me last night because she does PowerPoint presentations all the time. She's a doctor. And she said, well, the 2 cardinal rules are don't use a template and don't use a lot of words. And I said, but, so anyway, what I'm telling you is what you're in for is a template that has nothing but words. There you go. So, what do we have? We have a faith tradition that starts roughly speaking, about 500 BC in what is now India, in the northern part of India. I'm told that John talked a little bit on Sunday, a general overview of kind of the Buddha's life. I am one of the folks, and there are many of us, especially in this country, who regard the Buddha's life story as a myth. It may or may not have historical veracity. It couldn't matter less. It couldn't matter less because a myth is by definition something that's supposed to speak to every individual human soul. So whether it's literally or historically accurate doesn't matter. Does that sort of make sense? Everybody's kind of moved by myth because it's expressing something that's supposed to be fundamentally human, which by definition transcends gender, race, culture, religion, population. And when I look at the story of the Buddha's life, I go, oh, that's the spiritual path. That's one of the ways the spiritual path shows up in the human life, right? Somebody who's born sheltered and is treated like royalty. Isn't this what we do with our children? He's sheltered from all the suffering. Isn't that what we want? What to do with our kids? I hope you never learn about suffering and loss and death. We know we can't, but we still kind of want to, don't we? So we have this myth of a young prince. It's kind of the opposite of the Jesus story. Instead of being born into nothing and becoming royalty, he's born into royalty and then renounces. Similar, but kind of the mirror image, right? Born into royalty, he's promised his father's throne, firstborn son, the whole deal. And therefore shielded from all the difficulty of the world, poverty and old age and death. And at some point, he is exposed against all of his parents' best effort. He is exposed to the truth of sickness, old age, death, and the spiritual path. The possibility of working with these fundamental human experiences. That there's a way that humans have encountered and wrestled with and engaged with sickness and old age and death, right? The suffering of existence. And he's so moved by this, and he realizes, as we all do at some point, oh, the house and the money and the title and the clothes, they don't protect me from those things. There's not enough money in the world that keeps us from getting sick and old and dying, right? So this is kind of humanity 101. But according to the myth, he's learning this kind of bang, bang, bang. So symbolically, he kind of goes, oh. And again, I don't think this is too alien to us. I think all of us know from a very, very, very young age, oh, all of us get old, we all get sick, we all die. But it's up here. And then at some point later, and I don't know when this was for you because all of us have our own contact point, those things stop being abstract. And all of a sudden, they start settling and going, oh, that's me. Oh, there's no way out of this. Does that make sense? It's, right? So this is sort of symbolically him going, oh my God, I got bigger fish to fry than palace problems, so I renounce all of that. And so he, according to the myth, he literally does. He jumps over the palace walls, he renounces everything, he shaves his head, which in that culture at that time was highly powerful. It actually makes him, again, in that culture at that time, he goes from being the second highest caste to no one by shaving his head. He drops off the map. You're not even part of our social structure anymore. So it's a symbolic act again. It's renouncing attachment. But fast forward 2,500 years, and nuns and monks all over the world, when people decide to become ordained in the Buddhist tradition, they still shave their head as just a symbolic offering. I'm giving up. You know, even though these days in our culture, it isn't nearly as ostracizing. I don't even get weird looks because it's 2019. They probably think, well, there's a handsome young man. He's probably a sports figure, somebody amazing. He started going bald and thought, you know what I'm going to do? You know, cut this thing off at the pass and still look amazing. So you can see what it did for my vanity. I lost it entirely, didn't I? I'm so good at this. So we have this myth about somebody at some point renouncing, realizing it's kind of what Christ said, you know, your castle or your house is built on sand, or your castle, your house is built on rock. So this is his idea of rock. I'm going to go on a spiritual path and figure out what the origin of suffering is and if there's something that I can do, right? So according to the story, he trains for 6 years. There's a few different versions of it, and at age 36, again, a couple different versions, but that's the most common, he has an awakening. He has what they call an enlightenment. Sitting under a tree, the tree of life. Oh, that's a whole other lecture for a whole other time. Instead of being crucified under it, he sits, or crucified on it, he sits under it. It's a very, very similar symbol. Anyway, he wakes up. He wakes up to the truth of who he really, really is. He then starts to teach. And he teaches for, depending on the story, 40 years, 50 years. He dies at, 83 or something. So he lives a full, long life teaching, forming a community of people around him. There are political ramifications to his life. There are social ramifications to her life. There are gender ramifications to his life, having to do with the castes and who he allowed into the community that I don't have time to go into tonight, but again, for its time, wildly revolutionary what he did. The core teaching that I think all of the types of Buddhism would all agree on, if we were all here standing in front of you, we'd have all of our lovely quarrels about this particulars, but we would all go back to the historical Buddha, Northern India, 500 BC. We'd all agree on the Four Noble Truths. We'd all agree on the Eightfold Path. And where we might disagree is on the implications of those things and how to live them. A little like if you had the Baptist and the Catholic and the Lutheran and the Greek Orthodox, they would all agree on the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the four Gospels, right, Sermon on the Mount, and then what those implications are and how we live those out, that's where we start splitting hairs. But that's kind of the core. So, what do we got? Oh, I've already done this. See, this is just so cool. I push a button and then, oh, that's so great. I've done this already. Yeah, I'll skip it. The cool thing to know here, you probably know this already, actually. This is kind of almost mainstream, but Buddha is not his name. Kind of like Christ, you know, it's an honorific that implies anointed. Buddha means awakened. He woke up. That's all. He just woke up. He's awakened. One of the myths of his life is that after he had his awakening, he met somebody on the road who was so struck by his presence, just how present he was. They said, "Are you a god?" Can you imagine being asked that? Wow, what kind of presence somebody must. Are you a god? No. Are you an angel? No. What are you? Not who are you. What are you? Isn't that fascinating? What are you? And he said, "Oh, I'm awake." Like, you are too, sweetie. You don't know it, but you're awake. You're awakeness itself. You are awakeness, right? Buddha. So the Four Noble Truths, I'm really going to try to go fast here because I'm on the clock. The Four Noble Truths are not as alien to us as we think because all of us in this room, I will make the assumption, have absorbed through ourselves the medical model. And the Four Noble Truths, one way of looking at them is that they are the medical model when you go to the doctor and you've got that rash on your leg and you go, "Oh, it won't stop itching." And she comes in and goes, "Oh, don't worry about it, sweetie. What you have there is poison ivy." And we know what causes poison ivy. Were you rolling around in poison ivy? I don't know, maybe. Uh-huh. Well, your prognosis is fine. You're not going to die. I'm going to give you some cream, and you're going to put that on your leg twice a day for 2 weeks, and you're going to be all set. She just did diagnosis, cause, prognosis, cure. Everybody knows that. In fact, it's actually how we approach most problems. Oh, my wife and I have been fighting for what's going on with us? First, we identify there's a problem. What's going on? What's causing this? Is there anything we can do about it? And then what would it be? Very, very practical. This is the core of a faith tradition. And in our country, we call this science. I think that's fascinating. The argument, or the debate, or the conversation is very much alive in this country, very much alive at my Zen center. Or, well, is this thing we're doing, is this religion or what? Because depending on my definition, absolutely it is not, or absolutely it is. Depending entirely on how I define the R word. And I would love to take a poll of people on any given Sunday at Zen Center. You know, we get like 80 people. 80 people, you guys. That's why I'm freaking out being here. 80 people will get on a good Sunday to poll them at the door and say, "Hey, is what you just did for 2 hours, is this religion? And are you a Buddhist? Or would you self-define in some other way?" And I actually don't know what that would look like, but my guess is we'd be split probably about half and half on is this religion or not. And my guess, after hanging out at Zen Center for a couple decades, is probably the number of people that would self-define as Buddhist would be the minority. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm guessing that would be the minority. This is the core of a tradition. And from the outside, most people would say, "There's nothing there that argues with what I'm doing. So can I work on this stuff and be a Christian? Can I work on this stuff and be a Muslim? Can I work on this stuff and be a Jew? Can I work on this stuff and be an atheist? Can I work on this stuff?" And from our point of view, it's like, yeah, of course. Sure. One of my very dear friends, I don't know Susan Stibiel, but one of my very dear friends was ordained long before I was, and she finished all of her formal training long before I was. And she's a senior teacher at another Dharma center. It would never occur to her to miss Mass. Never occurred to her to miss Mass. She's a fully empowered Soto Zen priest. She can give precepts, she can ordain, she can create nuns and monks, she can give the precepts, she wears a huge big brown robe. She's beautiful. And it would never occur to her to miss Mass because she's a Catholic. She's a cat boo. We have cat boos, we have Lou boos, we have Jew boos. Isn't that wild? Wow. So, suffering, the universality of suffering, all he really said is, it appears to me looking around that every single human on this planet experiences the thing we call suffering or dissatisfaction, dukkha. Dukkha comes from the Sanskrit word that refers to a wheel on a cart that's slightly off center, and it works, but not quite right. There's a feeling everybody knows. Doesn't that feel like your life 95% of the time? Like it's working, but don't you wish it would? Dissatisfaction, struggle, resistance, constriction, difficulty, the human condition. And he said it was universal. What causes it? Oh boy, this is where we get to argue with each other. It's usually translated as desire, tanha, thirst, craving, attachment, aversion. The way we talk about this in Zen is it's when you want stuff to be different than it is. That's when it hurts. It ain't the traffic jam. It's the fact you wish there wasn't a traffic jam. And you start going, ooh, rats, you might be right. Isn't that interesting? What a refined examination of consciousness. The way that consciousness works, right? When I'm talking at high schools, this is like my favorite thing to do is talk to high schools, and I go, so on my way here today, you guys, I had to be here by 7:15 to start, seeing you guys. And I was nervous about being late because I've never been here before. And so I was in a traffic jam that Siri on my phone did not warn me about, right? And they're all like, yeah. I'm like, so man, traffic jams, they're just the worst, right? Yeah. Can we all agree that traffic jams cause suffering? All the hands go up, yes, they're just the worst. And I said, gotcha. No, they don't. How do I know? I know because this morning on my way here, when I'm freaking out, grabbing onto the steering wheel, I'm so scared of being late to Benilde St. Margaret's. I can see through the back window of the car in front of me, and the woman driving that car is singing along to the radio. And we're in the same traffic jam on the same day, at the same place, at the same time. And so if traffic jams cause suffering, she'd be suffering too, and she's not. So what's the difference between her heart and my heart? She's like, this is happening. She doesn't need it to be different, but I do. And the more I need it to be different, the more I suffer. Grasping. Do you feel it? I want it to be different. I'm resisting what is. Wow. So when you look back in your own memory of a time when you were deeply content, I'm not talking about happy or distracted or amused. Content. Profoundly content. Do you know what I mean by that word? That quiet, the space that comes with being deeply content. We usually list, oh, I know why, because it was Christmas morning and Grandma was still alive and all the kids were there and the smell of ham was coming from, right? And we describe all the external things that were happening. And then we think, well, if I could just recreate that, then I would have that feeling again. This is a very common way of looking at the world. It's human, right? But the truth is, what happened in that moment that cracked that open for you was, in that moment, you didn't need anything to be different. You needed nothing to be different. It actually wasn't the outside. Something inside said, everything is fine right now. And the invitation of Buddhism is, that's an internal state, and you get to do that whenever you want. You get to be the one who's content in the traffic jam. You can actually be content in the emergency room. You can be content administering to somebody who's in a great, great, great deal of pain. That's actually possible. The question is, are you fighting it? Are you saying, no, this shouldn't be, and yet it is? Does that make sense? It's fascinating, especially because again, I've got a Christian sensibility, being raised in that tradition. If everything that happens is God's will, I'm going, "Rrr." In that moment, I'm going, I like what you've done. I like what you've done for the most part, Lord. Wonderful, good. Kittens especially, that was a really, really good call. But here's the thing. Here's where you get it wrong. You're good most of the time, but here's where you get it wrong, because my favorite show got canceled, or my wife broke her leg, right? Or I keep getting ulcers, or my dad is judgmental. Does that make sense? Like I'm arguing with creation itself, going wrong, and of course the more I do that, the more I fight. Wow. So now you can sort of see where we're going with this, I hope. The prognosis, positive. Very positive. It's like, oh, it turns out people can totally work with their own minds. You can totally change your relationship with reality. Your prognosis is the same as it is with the poison ivy. You're in good shape, but there's a prescription. Oh man, there's a prescription. So the Eightfold Path. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because Susan in 2 weeks is going to spend most of her time on this, especially how it might be viewed from a Christian point of view. What I will say is the first two are about everything I've just said. Just sort of generally an overview of, oh, I see how suffering is created, and I'm going to make an aspiration to change that. I'm going to devote myself to changing that. The next three are the ethical components. They have a lot of depth to them, but at least on the surface, they're kind of the duh. Like, if you punch somebody, that's going to make them mad and they're going to treat you bad. It's sort of golden rule-y stuff. Speech, action, and livelihood are simply about making choices with what we say, what we do, and how we make a living, how we are in the world, lifestyle that's conducive to being kind and caring and not conducive to, right? So some of the examples in the ancient scripture is like, well, don't deal drugs, don't deal weapons, don't hit people, don't kill people, kind of the garden variety ethics. And then finally, the last three are the internal steps. Those all deal with the mind. So we have an 8-part prescription on how to transform suffering, and 3 of the 8 are internal. So that's one of the pioneering and radical things about Buddhism, is that it continues to posit that if you are suffering, you get to do something about that. It's tremendously empowering for that reason. It's tremendously aggravating for that reason. We love giving away our power. We secretly really do. If I say, don't we all agree that traffic jams suck, and everybody's hand goes up, we can all agree in our powerlessness. We have no power over the traffic jam. Of course I'm angry. I deserve to be. I'm right in my... Do you sort of feel it? I have no responsibility there. I can be in a cranky mood as long as I want. Instead of going, hey, what's going on? Where's that coming from in me? What's going on right now? Why is this, right? Instead of attending to the suffering that's there. So, in very early Buddhism, we have an incredibly narrow, incredibly difficult path. It is described as the path of the elders. The word Theravada is at the top of your page there. It's early in its formation, so it tends to be a little more dualistic. There's good ways of being, there's bad ways of being. The path is described as so intense and so demanding that very, very, very few people can do it. Because at the very beginning, at least, you want to practice Buddhism, that's great, but here's the deal. You got to give up your name, your family, all of your possessions, your hair. You get a robe, you get a bowl, someone else names you, you're done. That's pretty intense, right? We have Christian monastics that do very much the same thing. You give up your possessions, you shave your head, you give up. This isn't unheard of, but that was the only way of doing it. So holy macaroni, right? This is intense. It wasn't like, yeah, try it on the weekends and see if it digs. No, it's like, right? The ideal was to move from suffering into nirvana, from the place we are now, to release from those things. Kind of makes sense. Linear path, very, very straight. Described as being incredibly demanding. The ideal was dispassion. I do not prefer in my heart of hearts custard to broccoli. I do not prefer traffic jam to no traffic jam. Dispassion. Pretty intense. We fast forward to about the time of Christ. Some folks say about 100 BC, some folks say about 180. So then I go, oh, how about 0, right? When we all changed our calendars. The ideal changes ever so slightly, and Buddhism begins to split into 2 very large branches. The original that I just got through talking about, Theravadan, Orthodox, still alive and well. It is mostly practiced in Southeast Asia. We've probably all seen photos of people with begging bowls wearing the yellow robes, right, in Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous tradition. The Mahayana means the big vehicle. It isn't so exclusive anymore. There are other ways of doing this. And the ideals begin to shift very, very slightly, because the ideal changes from dispassion to compassion. And actually, I could probably talk 6 hours on this, on the power of that shift. It changes everything. Absolutely everything. So, Mahayana Buddhism starts to look a little more like what we now think of as religion: robes, services, liturgy, chanting, beads, weird clothes. I mean, these are the things we associate with Buddhism, not philosophy, not ways of life, right? Are you a philosopher? Yeah. Do you got to wear weird clothes? No. Do you got to wear weird clothes? Yeah, you must be religious, right? It feels more religious. Some other forms of Mahayana Buddhism are devotional, right? And Buddha lives as a human and he dies as a human, full stop. When he's 83 and he eats bad pork and he dies, boom, he's done. That's what killed him. Talk about no romance there, right? What are we going to do when you die? What are we going to do? And he's like, it's not me, it's the teaching. Right? You can continue to cure your poison ivy after your doctor dies. She told you how to do it. It ain't about her. She's not the vehicle of your salvation. She showed you the medicine to take. Take it. Do you feel the practicality of that? Wow. That's not faith in anything external. It's faith in our own practice, our own ability to change our consciousness, to transform suffering inside this human heart. Wow. That's pretty amazing. So it's much more broadly defined as a tradition, and there are many, many subdivisions. Zen is one of them. Lay people, families, it's a little more world-affirming, a little more earth-affirming. I'm going to talk about that a lot next week because of Zen. I'm going to skip over Zen entirely. Boom! But we have Buddhism actually being practiced by what we call Westerners starting in about the 1950s. Some of you remember the end of the beat movement, the beginning of the hippie movement. Things are starting to get very groovy, especially on the coasts. My grandma said, don't ever go there. This first wave of Tibetan teachers, Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and Japanese and Korean Zen teachers starting to actually teach Americans in the 1960s. So that's how long it's been here. Not very long. I mean, in terms of world religion, right? That's not very long at all. And so now it's beginning to fuse with our culture. One of the things it's doing really, really well, is fusing with psychology. Part of that is the mindfulness movement. I'm guessing everybody in this room has heard the word mindfulness. And 20 years ago, if I said, how many of you have you heard the word mindfulness? No hands would go up. So that's becoming mainstream now. Meditation, the idea that you can work with your mind to change your experience of being alive, isn't freaky fringy anymore. You know, your therapist wants you to do it. You want your kids to do it. You certainly want your spouse to do it, for God's sake. Right? Wow, yeah, you can calm yourself down. You can change your blood pressure. You can change your posture. You can change your heart rate. You can change all sorts of stuff. You can change the way, you know. So the practicality of Buddhism is fusing with our American practicality, our American science, right? We all belong to the cult of science, whether we like it or not. We do, you know. Prove it. Oh, yeah, that's the ground of Buddhism. I read an interview with the Dalai Lama once somebody was really kind of poking him. They wanted to see if they could get a rise out of him. What would happen if science disproved one of your faith beliefs? And he's like, oh, I guess we'd have to change the faith belief. Like, yeah, no problem. Like, we're not doing that whole thing. What we're doing is called awareness. Anything that works to increase the awareness inside the human mind, inside the human heart, because awareness leads to things called compassion and wisdom and connection and love, and I'm not going to abide anything that would get in the way of that. And if my belief is proven false, I let it go. Do you sort of see the motion there? That motion is huge. So he said, this is the Dalai Lama. He's not my guy because he's not a Zen guy, but he's everybody's guy because come on, man, that guy is so awesome, right? Whether you believe in God or not does not matter so much. Whether you believe in Buddha or not does not matter so much. And as a Buddhist, whether you believe in reincarnation or not does not matter so much. You must lead a good life. And a good life does not just mean good food, good clothes, good shelter. These are not sufficient. A good motivation is what is really needed. Compassion. Without dogmatism, without complicated philosophy, just understanding that others are human brothers and sisters and respecting their rights and their human dignity. Wow. If that sounds like religion to you, it's religion. If that sounds like humanitarian, it's humanitarian. If that sounds like science to you or good psychology, good. If that sounds Christian to you, good. You can sort of feel, right? Yes, we will disagree about whether or not we come back once or whether or not we come back many times or whether or not our robes should be red or whether or not they should be orange. But at the bottom of all of it, if any of those things stop making me kind, then I forgot who I am. What else am I here to do? I'm here to wake up, to figure out that I am love, to figure out that you are love, to be able to gaze into your eyes and see myself, for you to be able to gaze into my eyes and see you. And if that's religion, call me religious. But I can feel how quickly I can get in my own way. How easy it is for me to say that, and how quickly I can get in my own way. And so everything I've been taught in the 20 years I've been studying this tradition is notice those things that get in the way. They're your suffering. And please meet those wounds, those little breaks, those little pockets of constriction and pain. Please meet those with great compassion. Please heal those things in your heart because then it will flow. It's just what Rustin was saying in his thing outside. We're just conduits of love. So when you're not a conduit of love, no, find where the constriction is, sweetie. Don't amputate it. Don't judge it. Don't beat it. We never get a good disciplined dog when we do that. But when you discipline with love, right? That's the entirety of the path, is everything I've been taught. Find your suffering and love it back into the light. Find your suffering, love it back into the light, right? So, everything exposed to the light becomes the light. That sounds like Zen to me. That's from Ephesians. Clean the inside, right? And then the outside will be cleaned up well automatically. That's from Matthew. And finally, the lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is sound, your whole body will be filled with light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be filled. Right? The part of me that sees a traffic jam as pain, that's in my eye. That's not in the traffic jam. We have this teaching. All of our traditions have this teaching. So, part of why this faith tradition is working so well in this country, why Americans are taking to it, is the emphasis on the individual. Where Americans, you do it yourself, right? That sounds like Buddhism, right? You're not getting into heaven on anybody's back in this tradition unless you do it. Okay, I get it, yes. Bootstraps, Grandma said that, yes, right? Very, very practical, fits wonderfully well with science. Theistic beliefs, you can have them or not have them. We just kind of don't go there, so use them if you want. There's no intermediary required, though. And I think a lot of folks, and this is what I'll end with, I think a lot of folks really identify with the Buddhist ideal of original blessing, of original wholeness. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I know that's potentially divisive. The idea of original sin that I was raised with, I'm a spiritual director for a living, right? I meet with people just one-to-one and talk about their faith path, whether they're Jewish or Christian, or I have a couple Buddhists, but they have a whole bunch of ideas you got to get rid of. Anyway, the idea of original brokenness and how that's shown up in their psyche, what that's done to them, and the idea of being born perfect. You're born, you're done. Sweetheart, you're done. And of course, your job now is to realize that. You're not done. But do you understand the paradox? I actually think everybody understands the paradox. I've never met anybody who said, I looked into the eyes of a newborn and I saw brokenness. I've never seen any one person tell me that. Now, is that kid self-aware? No. Do they have a lot of work to do? Oh, yeah. But we all recognize pure consciousness as pure consciousness because we are that. He made it and he said it was good. And I think that appeals to a very deeply human part of us. So I think that's part of why this has taken on so in this country. But that has been 45 minutes. That's extremely restrained for me. I'm so proud of myself. And I want to make sure to allow plenty of time for questions from you guys. I'm much more interested in what you have got to ask me than what I've just said. The only thing I can tell you before we start is nothing is off limits. I'm uninsultable, right? That's not true. I'm almost uninsultable, and I'm not here to convert anybody to anybody. So please feel free to ask me whatever you've got about anything I've shared or anything you've read or anything you've been exposed to. I know some of you saw the Thich Nhat Hanh movie, that beautiful Walk With Me. John confessed to me that he said a whole bunch of wildly untrue things on Sunday. If any of you can remember those, we could kind of call them out. Would that be fun? I could help do that. So anything is fair game. I have this, but maybe I should give this to you.
Let's see if we can hear without it. But if we need it, I'll bring it around. Yes, you should.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
John, if you can use the mic for the recording.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll be Phil Donahue tonight.
Oh, yeah, that takes me back.
I'm interested to know, at the temple, do they have programs for children?
What a great question. Thank you. We do as of this coming September. It's always been a challenge for us. It's always been a challenge for us because meditation is like, in a Zen temple, is like the least kid-friendly place you could probably imagine. Like, oh, we just sort of sit still for long periods and don't twitch. like that's hard enough for 40-year-olds. But 4-year-olds kind of lose their mind. So actually what it's been for us at Zen Center is a space consideration. If we have a separate space, then it's just like, do you guys have daycare during service? So like kids, that's exactly what we're going to try to do starting in the fall, so that when the parent comes, they can do meditation and listen to a teaching or something like that, where their kid is ushered off into another space. But we just have this crazy old house built in 1905. You guys, 1905. I just say that because they put the bathrooms in really weird ways, and there's servant stairs next to the regular stairs, and there's no parking lot. Oh, good Lord. Anyway, we have not had a space, and so we've just finally figured out, well, if we repurpose that classroom and we do this here, and as long as they don't scream, we should be okay. A long answer. Starting in September, we hope to have children's programming. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. For anyone wanting to supplement what you've shown us tonight by reading non-wiki material, library material, what beginning reader would you recommend for us, please?
Thank you. What a lovely question. I'll give two answers. The first is, if you're interested in and again, Susan's going to talk about this in 2 weeks. If you're interested in the interface, the overlap, the connection between Christianity and Buddhism, I would recommend Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh. If you guys saw the Walk With Me movie, you know who that is. An unbelievably beautiful human soul, no matter who you are. You meet this person and go, oh, he's like a Mother Teresa kind of figure where you just crack open. He wrote a beautiful book called Living Buddha, Living Christ. That's a good one. Leaving Home, Jesus and Buddha as Brothers, he also wrote. Beautiful. If you're interested in more of just sort of Buddhism 101, what can I do to learn more? I also recommend his book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Zen guy. He's a Vietnamese Zen priest. And he's in his 80s. Does anybody know? I want to say 80. 92 or 93. Is it really 92? Wow, you guys. Oh, he's an angel. 92 or 93 he is. His book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, is really everything I just did tonight in much, much, much greater depth. I really like his voice. Now, again, this is my bias because I'm a Zen guy. So if you read Buddhism 101 from the Dalai Lama through the Tibetan lens, you'd get a little bit of a different flavor. If you read it through a Theravadan lens, a little bit of a different flavor. Like Chinese Zen, a little bit of a different flavor. I like him because he spent most of his life engaged with Buddhist-Christian dialogue. He worked a lot with Thomas Merton. You guys know Thomas Merton, of course you do. And because English is like his third language, the words he knows in English are simple, but that doesn't mean what he's teaching is like Buddhism light or something. He's giving you the real deal, but his words are simple, and I think that makes it more accessible, as opposed to using long, culturally bound, crazy terminology. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any of those would be fantastic. Does that help? The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching is a great Buddhism 101 book, and if you're interested in there's a lot now about Buddhism and Christianity, but Zen for Christians is a good one. Living Buddha, Living Christ is my favorite, I think, yeah. Please.
Oh. Okay. So I think you've answered this question, but are you saying that you can practice Buddhism and Christianity?
Yeah.
Like in a duality, like together?
Yep, for sure. Okay. Now, the caveat there, because I'm playing fast and loose up here, and it's easy for me to say from this side, right? I still teach and lead retreats in a Christian setting. So when I'm like at the House of Prayer, Episcopal House of Prayer, I use all Christian terminology, and I lead a week-long retreat up there, and I feel Christian, and it's all Jesus iconography. And as a human, I can tell you that my heart resonates in a different way to Christian teaching and Christian iconography than it does to Buddhist teaching and Buddhist iconography. Not better or worse. They just have different flavors. And again, because I was raised immersed in Christian, there's some part of me that just goes, oh yeah, right? The personhood of Christ and the Paschal mystery, and there's so many different ways in which my heart resonates and responds to that. But again, there's nothing here that I've presented to you that is in any way conflicting with any of that. Buddhism has been described, at least Zen has been described, as an orthopraxy. There's your vocab word tonight. Orthopraxy as opposed to orthodoxy. It is a practice-based faith. You develop a feeling for living. But whenever I'm doing interfaith stuff, which I'm blessed to do a lot of, the way the people who are moderating love to start sentences is, what do Buddhists believe about? And I was go, oh man, here it comes. Because I'm with the Dalai Lama. Like, what if something disproves your belief? Well, then we pitch the belief. It ain't about the idea. It's about something that transcends the idea. I'm not moved when someone goes, I've had a lot of thoughts about loving you. I believe that I might just. Right? I'm interested in that direct, I love you. Explain that to me. I can't. Humans have been trying to describe that feeling for thousands of years in plays and songs and poems, and they're always close, and they sort of orbit it, but you can never quite land, can you? Of course you can, because it's transcendent, because it's everything, it's everywhere. And I very much love to think, that we have the gift, the blessing of living on a planet that's we're surrounded by 7.5 billion other beautiful bipeds who are all approaching and orbiting this same thing that happens to our heart when we look at the night sky and go, what is it? And we look into a newborn and go, what is it? And from that point of view, I refuse to get caught up in your version versus my version. How could I possibly be vain enough to think I had answered that? Impossible. I love the not knowing at the heart of Zen. The not knowing is so valued. Oh, you don't know. Isn't that wonderful? When you look into the eyes of the person you love and really why, isn't it wonderful to go, I don't know. But God, it's so true. Every cell of my body resonates with you. I love you and I don't know why. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't that feel like a surrender? So absolutely you can practice, at least from a Zen, from the Buddhist side. And again, I am biased. I know a lot of folks who would have no problem defining themselves as Catholic Buddhists or Buddhist Catholics or Lutheran Buddhists or Jewish Buddhists. And I also know that there are plenty of expressions of either of those traditions that would say, no, 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 no. But come on. At least, again, that's my own bias. I would be highly suspicious of any faith that said, yeah, you can do that, but you can't, Because I don't believe love works that way. I looked over you guys' website. I don't think you guys do either. You're way too groovy. Am I answering your question? I'm often riffing here, but what a beautiful question. Yeah. Rustin, do you got your eye on the clock, my friend? I've lost it entirely. So if there's a big vaudeville hook at some point, I'm okay.
So I have two things I want to ask you about.
Sure.
One is, can you give us just a little explanation of your garb? And I also noticed that you don't have shoes on.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that? And then the second part of my question is really probably going to show my own ignorance in others. But can you talk a little bit about like the happy fat Buddha that we see? Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes.
The statuary, you know, I mean, we see the Buddhas that are more oriental looking. with
Yes.
and then there are the Buddhas that have like the elephants. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
understand all of that stuff.
Oh, lordy, me neither. I'm going to answer that one first, okay? What a great question. So, okay, come on, Busho, be brief. You can do it, buddy. It's so funny because in Zen we never say anything. Like the truth can't be expressed, and then all we do is talk about it. Isn't that hilarious? That's hilarious. Love can't be expressed. I'm going to try as hard as I can for 6 hours to talk about it. Anyway, so Buddhism is born of a kind of proto-Hindu culture, much the way Christianity is born of a Jewish culture. Does that make sense? It kind of breaks off from that family tree, so to speak. And therefore, it culturally inherits a whole bunch of things. Some folks even argue that's where the reincarnation deal comes from, because some Buddhists are super into the reincarnation deal, and others are like, yeah, I don't know, who cares? As a Western Zen guy, we're more of that latter. We don't really know. But Hinduism has a pantheon of expressions of the divine: animal, human, hybrids, male, female, not otherwise specified. It's very, very complicated. And they have said, oh, Buddha's, he was one of ours. Yeah. He didn't break away, he was just one of ours, which is very, very groovy. Again, I think that's very, very cool. So I'm guessing all the animal expressions that you're pointing to are probably that overlap. Because a lot of these things came to our country at the same time. Tibetan Buddhism came at the same time as Zen, at the same time as Hinduism, at the same time as, remember when the Beatles got into the Maharishi Yogi, and we're getting all this sort of, like TM came, and it was all kind of at the same time. In this country, those things kind of go and get mushed together. So here, now, we tend to associate Buddha statues the same way we talk about Om or Namaste or yoga or spas or hanging out and being groovy. Zen, we've decided, means very chill. It does not mean that, but we've decided it does, right? Because it all got kind of mushed together. So because you're asking a really great question. So some of you have been to restaurants or places of business where there's the big fat golden, super tacky, like a lot of the stuff my grandma had in her house, the like weird glow-in-the-dark Jesus. It's kind of that equivalent of like the big fat plastic golden Buddha. So very happy, super joyous. So that's not Buddha. We usually think it is. Oh, the fat Buddha belly. And I was kind of like, oh, that's not Buddha. It's not Buddha. That's Hotei, Hotei. He's a monk from China, and he is the same symbol, roughly, in that culture as Santa. Big fat guy with a big bag. If you look carefully, he always has a big bag. Presents for kids. He represents prosperity. He represents generosity. He represents giving stuff out. So you're like, oh yeah, Santa, right. But the myth is, on his deathbed, as he's dying, this monk who lives his whole life being big, fat, jolly guy handing out stuff to kids, he confesses, I'm the Buddha yet to come. So in a few thousand years, I'll be back. Isn't that cool? So he's not Buddha, but he's going to come back and be Buddha. So even this tradition, this Buddhist tradition that doesn't have the idea of the messianic savior, kind of starts getting like, oh, by the way, he's gone, but he's going to come again. I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar. And he's going to clean stuff up. And you're like, now this is really starting to sound familiar, right? So that's who that is. And then the first question, the clothing, yes, I always wear my kind of uniform when I go to these gigs because I think it's a good teaching point. So really quickly, this is just work clothing. They're called samoe. When you're ordained, the idea is, and this goes all the way back to the original expression of Buddhism, 500 BC, the Buddha really wanted his followers to be visibly identifiable as such. And I guess there are reasons why. I think to discern who the Sikhs were and who the Hindus were and who the Buddhists were, that there must have been a reason why you'd need to know that. There's probably a huge amount there that I don't know. And it was never required of me to be visibly identifiable. But it has been the tradition for thousands of years. So the way Buddhism, and especially Zen, is organized is there's no equivalent of the Vatican. There's no central authority, which means there's nobody on the top giving you the party line. Does that make sense? I've been to Mass, of course, as a Catholic. I've been to a Mass, dozens of different churches for weddings and funerals all over the country. And if anybody ever knows the Mass, you go to a Mass at a different church, it's still a Mass. It's McDonald's. You know you're going to get the same hamburger here as you are in Iowa. That's a terrible comparison. Sorry. I mean that in a good way. It's quality control, right? But the Mass is the Mass is the Mass, right? Because somebody at the top said, by the way, that's the way, and we're going to change it now, and you're not going to say, and also with you, you're going to say, and also with your spirit, just to screw with you kids who are raised with, right? So, but there is no such equivalent in Buddhism at all, which means the person who ordains you, the person who trains you, and the person who someday decides, yeah, you're done, is a human, and they're your teacher. That's it. They answer to no one, and you answer to no one but them. So what that means is this tradition, for 2,500 years, has been handed down from person to person to person to person, right? Kind of like hopscotch. If you're a girl and you learned how to play hopscotch, there's no hopscotch authority that said it should now be arranged this way. You learned it from your friend who learned it from her sister, who learned it from her mom, who learned it from. So we say from warm hand to warm hand, the Dharma has been passed for 2,500 years. So now a system, I'm trying to be focused here, a system that is only, where you only answer to one person, you can see the efficiency of that, but you can also sort of see, ooh, well, that would lend itself to certain abuses if we are not careful, right? You're done when I say you're done. Start sounding like your dad. How come? Because I said so. That, we have to be careful. So where I'm going with this is my teacher, who's still the guiding teacher of Minnesota Zen Center there in Minneapolis, he was raised in California as a Unitarian. So if my grandma were in the room, she'd say, 2 strikes. I love my grandma. She, ooh, man, what even are those 2 things? California, oh my God. Anyway, my friend, no offense. This is my grandma. I hope your grandma said the same about Minnesota. Oh God, they're like polar bears there. They go to school on snowmobiles. Anyway, why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because when he ordained me, he said, in the ceremony, you're going to get a robe and a bowl, and you'll shave your head. That's the way it's been done for thousands of years. If you think that shaving the head thing is going to get in the way of you helping people, then don't do it. When he was ordained, he was a social worker, and he worked primarily on Native American reservations. And this is back in the 70s. So when he was being ordained, nobody shaved their head back then. If you're bald, you got cancer and you're dying, right? And so when he went to his teacher and said, well, we'll do the ceremony, his teacher said, isn't it going to hurt the people that you help? Isn't it going to create a distance between you if you shave your head? And my teacher, Tim, said, yeah, probably. And then don't. We have to obey the spirit of the law, not the law. The spirit's about connection. So you break the rule. Keep your head. Keep your fur, right? So I did choose to shave my head, and I still do it twice a week. The tradition is on days that end with a 4 or a 9. Sikunichi. You shave your head on days that end with a 4 or a 9. I don't do that. I just do it when I start looking grisly. Again, that's a ritual reenactment of shaving, to let go of the... You are visibly identifiable. These are the equivalent of jeans and a t-shirt. This is a way of saying I am nothing special. I work, and I'm here for you. It's supposed to arouse no greed. So colors are plain, Loose-fitting, boring. It's the opposite of what we normally associate with. You guys know what I'm talking about. Like, the guy looks awesome. It's supposed to be the opposite of that. You look invisible. And then finally, the robe, and I'll end with this, I think. The robe, the tradition of the robe goes again all the way back to 500 BC. The Buddhist robe has been done the same way, roughly speaking, for 2,500 years, and the design is a rice field. So probably all of you have seen those photos online or movies of nuns and monks wearing robes. They're usually yellow, saffron, orange, red, sometimes black. They all have this same pattern, long rows for harvesting and short rows for planting. So the staple crop in India at 500 BC was rice. So everybody, without even being told, would have known what a rice field is. It's life. It's life. It's just little pieces of fabric all sewn together. And in the original tradition, you had to sew your own, which we still do. It takes about a year because it's done in a very particular way. To sew a full, I'm talking about the big full robe. But the instruction was, find cloth no one wants. Don't go buy any. Well, you don't have any money, so you can't. We don't want anything that's going to arouse greed. So you're going to find your cloth, you're going to take it off of dead bodies at the charnel grounds. You're going to find it in piles in the garbage. You're going to take old menstrual rags. You're going to take stuff that has been discarded. And then you'll dye it, all the same color or close. The saffron is a disinfectant. That's how the robes were evolved to be the color they were. It's a disinfectant because the robe, they would have been filthy, right? Can you imagine? Cloth from the junkyard. You sterilize it. Oh, it turns sort of a yellowy orange. Great, that'll be the color. And you sew it together in the pattern of a rice field. So the Dalai Lama, you've all seen pictures of him, that beautiful red. In Southeast Asia, the yellow, the orange. Thich Nhat Hanh, usually the brown. In Zen, we have the brown, we have the black, we have the gray. All of these colors have one thing in common that Minnesotans know really, really well about 5 months from now. They're all colors of a leaf that's about to let go for the last time. Black, gray, orange, yellow. Something that's letting go. So in the Zen tradition, one of the things that's unique to Zen, and I'll talk about this next week, is this little tiny version we get to wear. We're so spoiled. This little tiny version we get to wear around our neck. Instead of the big one, I've got the big one too, and I'll wear it for the services and the liturgy and that kind of stuff. But we invented this during the 6th century in China. Buddhism was in China by the 6th century, and China was going through one of its purges. We're going to get rid of non-Chinese influence. We are Confucianist and we are Taoist. And a few hundred years ago, we got careless, and the Indians started coming in, bringing their Buddhism, and so we're going to get rid of them. And so they did. They killed them, they burned down temples, they destroyed statues, and they murdered people. This should sound familiar to everybody. It's the human story. And so the Buddhist nuns and monks at that time said, we can't give up the tradition of the robe. It symbolizes life. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to sew a little tiny one. And we'll wear it around our neck on a strap, and we'll wear it under our clothes, and no one will know. And we'll keep the tradition alive and in secret. Right? So kind of like if you were Jewish and it was 1935 and you lived in Berlin, you probably would take your skull cap off and put it in your pocket. You're not going to let that thing go because it's your tradition, right? But if you wear it outside, you'll be killed. So you're wise enough to do this. That's what this is. A small version of the robe. That when the persecution was over and it became okay again to be a Buddhist, they sort of figured out, not only is this a cool symbol of our kind of resistance and defiance, which is just groovy, right? It's like Buddhist black leather jacket kind of a deal, right? But it's also super convenient. This thing is so much easier to wear than that big thing. Try raking the yard wearing one of those things. It's impossible. But this is groovy. You put it on, you take it off, no problem. It's called rakusu. It's called a rakusu, and this only takes about 3 months to sew. But the symbolism is identical. The symbolism is identical. You wear the robe. It's called the robe of liberation in the field is the field of all of us. Interconnectedness, the field that gives life to all of us. So that's the symbol. And so that's been around for a long, long time. And I'm happy to wear it. And you know, you guys have been so patient. Thank you. I'm grateful to you for your eye contact. I'm grateful to you for your attention. I'm grateful to you for the invitation and the warmth. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much. I'll be back again next week to talk more about Zen. I promise it'll make way less sense than everything I said tonight. But I know you've got to bring this thing home and let these folks go, so.
Bushalon, everyone, say thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful that we get you back again next week. I like the idea actually falling into that a little bit by accident. Works for me. It gives us a better chance to know you better, so thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. On your way out, I would remind you we're in the midst of a sermon series on Buddhism. So Sunday, I'll be spending most of the time making some more comparisons, particularly between Jesus and the Christian tradition and the things that I'm trying to learn about Buddhism along the way. And then again, as you've already heard, next week we'll be back here. Also on your way out, there's little cards for both of these things by the door. We have a really important interfaith engagement ministry that's in maybe its second official year of existence, but finding great traction and offering lots of different opportunities in the life of this community. Whether you're a member of this church or not, doesn't matter to us at all. We'd love for you to engage in that part of who we are. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you once again, Bouchot. And Rustin, thank you, brother. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.